The Space Adventures of Kael Raven. Story 2, First Year, The Boy Who Didn't Belong. Year, 2847 CE, Location, Valhari Prime Orbital, The Academy, Kael age, 9. Duskera produced farmers. Quellis Station produced engineers and dock workers and people whose sky was a viewport and whose horizon was a bulkhead wall. Valhari Prime produced politicians and merchants and the children of politicians and merchants, who had been told since birth that they were the center of the Valhari system story. The Academy took all of them, poured them into the same orbital station above the most important planet in the system, gave them the same gray and silver uniforms, and called it education. For most of them, the hardest thing about the first year was the workload. For Kael Raven, the hardest thing about the first year was everyone else. He was 9 years old. He had black hair and green eyes that unsettled people who looked at them too long. He had arrived from a planet nobody had heard of, carrying one bag, one compass, and the entire weight of everything two people had poured into him on a cold farm at the edge of the universe. He was not ready for the Academy. The Academy was not ready for him. This is the story of how they worked that out. The fold from Duskera's orbital relay took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Kael spent most of it at the transport's viewport, watching the nothing of fold space, a quality of darkness distinct from regular space, a darkness that felt somehow aware of you, that pressed gently against the transparent alloy of the viewport as if curious. Fold space was where the universe forgot you existed, or so the text said. Kael found this neither frightening nor comforting. He found it accurate. The sensation of the fold was a brief, complete absence, not of consciousness, not of sensation, but of something less definable. Context, perhaps. The sense of being somewhere specific. For a few seconds of subjective time, you were nowhere, and then you were elsewhere, and the transition had no middle. He had folded before, once, briefly, the short fold from Duskera's surface relay to the system transfer hub. That had lasted less than a minute. 4 hours was different. 4 hours gave you time to think, which on this particular journey he could not entirely recommend. He thought about the farm. He thought about Idrin at the boundary line. He thought about the compass in his breast pocket, which he reached up and touched once, confirming it was there, then did not touch again. He thought about what he was going toward. The lens on his wrist, standard Academy issue, gray casing, matte finish, a sign at the transfer hub with a perfunctory orientation from an administrator who had clearly given the same orientation 900 times and had stopped finding it interesting around the 800th, pulsed once softly with a pale blue light.
Arrival at Valhari Prime Orbital in 22 minutes. Would you like a briefing on Academy arrival protocols?
No.
Would you like a summary of the Academy's facilities?
I've read it.
All of it?
Yes.
Very well.
The blue light faded. Kael looked back at the viewport. The full darkness was thinning. The universe was remembering them. And then, with the particular abruptness of fold exit, the darkness snapped away entirely and Valhari Prime was there. And Kael Raven, farm boy from Duskera, stopped breathing for a full 3 seconds. He had seen images. Of course he had. The Academy database had extensive visual files on Valhari Prime, and he had accessed all of them in the weeks before departure, studying the planet with the systematic thoroughness he brought to everything he needed to understand. He had thought himself prepared. He had not been prepared. Valhari Prime was blue. Not the bruised, heavy purple of Duskera, blue. The deep, saturated, almost painful blue of a world with real oceans, real weather systems, real light from a sun that was not pale and thin and apologetic but generous and warm and golden. White cloud systems spiraled across its surface in patterns of extraordinary beauty, their shadows moving across the ocean below like slow, enormous thoughts. The planet's single large continent was a green and brown and gold patchwork from orbit, with the blazing silver thread of the Valhari River cutting through it from north to south. It was, objectively, beautiful. Kael was aware of this in the way he was aware of most things, completely, precisely, with every analytical faculty he possessed engaged. But what he actually felt, looking at it, was something closer to offense. It was so easy. That was the word his mind found. Duskera had fought every living thing on its surface, had made warmth and color and beauty something you earned, daily, with your hands. This planet looked like it had never made anything difficult for anyone. It looked like a planet that had simply decided, quite early, to be pleasant, and had been pleasant ever since, without consultation. He was aware this was not a rational response to a planet. He filed it anyway. Then the Academy station came into view around the planet's curve, and rational responses became temporarily unavailable. He had read the specifications. 2 kilometers from end to end. 6 concentric rings around a central spine, each ring rotating at a slightly different rate to maintain varied gravity zones for different training requirements. Transparent alloy panels along the outermost ring, that was the observation deck, he recognized it immediately. Docking ports along the lower spine accommodating vessels from personal scout runners to mid-range fold carriers. The gray and silver of Academy livery on every surface, interrupted by the blue running lights that indicated active status on all systems. Specifications were one thing. The actual object, hanging against Velhari Prime's blue curve, illuminated by a generous golden sun, that was another thing entirely. He pressed his palm against the viewport glass. Not consciously. His hand simply went there, the way it had gone against the transport window leaving Duskera, that same instinct to make contact with the boundary between himself and something vast.
Docking in 8 minutes.
Kael took his hand from the glass. He sat back. He straightened his spine, Even's habit, the habit of a man who had decided to hold himself together by holding himself upright. He was 9 years old, and he was about to walk into the largest, most advanced educational institution in the Velhari system, and he had come from a farm. He found, checking his internal inventory carefully and honestly, that he was afraid.
Thanks. Good. That means it matters.
He straightened his spine a little further. The transport docked. The intake hall was enormous and it was full of noise. Kael stood just inside the main docking entrance and did what he always did when confronted with something complex and fast-moving. He went completely still and he observed. Several hundred cadets, the new Foundation intake, plus returning upper-year students moving through on their way to other sections, were filling the hall with the particular energy of people who were either very excited or trying very hard to look like they were not nervous, which produced the same noise level regardless. Grav sleds whisked luggage through overhead channels. The station AI announced things in a calm, measured voice that nobody appeared to be listening to. Lens devices pulsed on hundreds of wrists in a rhythm that looked, from Kael's vantage point, like a bioluminescence tide. Everyone was looking around with wide eyes and open mouths. Kael stood perfectly still, green eyes moving systematically across the space, cataloging entry points and exit points, the flow patterns of people and equipment, the location of each visible instructor or senior cadet, the acoustic properties of the hall which would tell him something about the station's construction materials, the micro-expressions of the cadets nearest him which would tell him something about the general emotional atmosphere. A passing upper-year student glanced at Kael as he walked past. He stopped. He looked back. There was something about the stillness, apparently, that registered even in a crowded hall. The fact of one person not moving when everyone else was. He looked at Kael for a moment. Then he said, to his companion, in a voice not quite quiet enough. New intake. The one standing there like he's planning an invasion. They moved on. Kael filed this. He was not planning an invasion. He was simply looking. Though he supposed the distinction was not immediately obvious from the outside. Foundation cadets were assigned to dormitory units of 4. Kael's was on the 3rd ring, Section 7, Room 42, for sleeping alcoves around a central shared space, a work table, for storage units, and a single wide view port looking out over Velhari Prime's curve. He arrived first. He chose the alcove with the best sight line to the door and the furthest position from it, which was also the alcove directly beside the viewport. He unpacked his single bag with the same efficiency he applied to everything, each item placed deliberately, the compass set on the alcove's small shelf where he could see it from his sleeping position. He sat on the edge of his sleep surface and looked at the compass for a moment. Then the door opened and Doss arrived. Doss did not so much enter a room as happened to it. He was large for his age, not in the dense, functional way Kael was large, but in the enthusiastic way of someone who had always been the biggest person present and had decided this was an invitation to occupy space joyfully. He had a broad face, warm brown skin, and an expression of such unguarded delight at being exactly where he was that it was genuinely difficult not to respond to it. He stopped inside the door and looked at Kael. Kael looked back. Doss's gaze went to the compass on the shelf. To the single, precisely organized bag. To the alcove placement. To Kael's face. Then he grinned, the kind of grin that starts somewhere around the back of the head and arrives at the face with considerable velocity.
You took the good spot.
Yes,
I would have taken the same one.
I know.
Doss considered this. Then he dropped approximately 30% of his luggage on the floor, extended a hand across the room, and said,
Doss. Merchant family, colliery station, midbelt. I have been told I talk too much, which I think is unfair because some of what I say is genuinely useful, and I plan to have the best year of anyone in this intake, and I've decided you and I are going to be friends. He paused. You can tell me if that's wrong.
Kael looked at him for a moment. At the extended hand. At the expression, which was open and warm and completely without the social calculation that most people brought to first meetings. He reached across and shook the hand.
Kael. Farm. Duskera.
Duskera. He tried the word again, processing. I haven't heard of it.
Nobody has.
Is it good?
Kael thought about the ridge above the farm. The jungle glow. The 2 moons. His father at the boundary line.
Yes. It's very good.
Doss nodded seriously, as if this had settled something important. Then he turned and began the considerable project of dealing with his luggage, talking as he did so, a running commentary on the dormitory, the journey, the intake hall, the quality of the station AI's announcement voice.
Very authoritative, slightly too authoritative, like it's compensating for something.
And the size of the viewport.
Excellent, I require significant amounts of sky or I get restless, it is a known condition.
And Kael sat on the edge of his sleep surface and listened and found, with some surprise, that he did not find this exhausting. Doss talked the way Duskera's jungle breathed, continuously, organically, without apparent effort, and with an underlying rhythm that you started to hear once you stopped noticing the noise. She arrived an hour later, while Doss was still reorganizing his belongings into configurations he found more satisfactory. Mira was precise. That was the word Kael's mind produced immediately and held. She was not tall, but she moved as if she were, the economy of motion that came from training, from people who had been taught that every unnecessary movement was a liability. She had dark copper skin and close-cropped black hair and the kind of stillness and repose that was the opposite of vacancy. It was attention, directed inward, coiled. Her eyes were dark and fast-moving and assessed everything they landed on with a speed that Kael recognized because it was similar to what he did himself, except where his assessment was curious, hers was evaluating. She walked to the remaining 2 alcoves, evaluated them without appearing to, and took the one opposite Kael's. She glanced at him as she set her bag down. He met her eyes. A brief, mutual recognition, the kind that has nothing to do with liking each other and everything to do with identifying what the other person is. 2 people who both knew how to look at a room and what to do with what they saw. Then Doss said, from inside his storage unit.
I'm Doss. That's Kael. He's from a planet nobody's heard of and he has a compass, which I find intriguing. You have the last good spot, well done, you were fast.
Mira looked at the back of Doss's head for a moment.
Myra. Velhari Prime. A pause. Military family.
Of course.
Does he always?
Yes.
Continuously.
The 4th member of their unit arrived that evening, when the station lights had shifted to their amber twilight cycle and the viewport showed Velhari Prime's night side lit by the galaxy of city lights below. He came in quietly. He had a quality of moving through space without disturbing it, not invisibility, but a kind of acoustic neutrality, as if he had learned to subtract himself from environments. He was slight and pale-skinned with white blonde hair cropped close and eyes so light gray they appeared almost silver in the ambient station lighting. He looked at each of them once, a brief, complete survey, and then he went to his alcove and began unpacking with a minimum of motion and no sound.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Doss.
I know. I could hear you from the corridor.
Fair. I'm told that happens.
Sable did not reply. He finished unpacking and lay back in his alcove and looked at the ceiling, apparently done with the interaction. Doss looked at Kael and mouthed something. Kael looked at Sable's profile in the alcove and noted, the almost silver eyes had not closed. He was not resting. He was listening. And whatever world he was from, nobody had ever heard of it, because when Doss had gently attempted the question during the brief exchange, Sable had said simply,
Somewhere quiet.
and left it there. Kael noted this. He filed it differently from how he filed most things. Not as information to be cross-referenced. As a door with no handle, that would open when it was ready, and not before. The first full day at the academy began at 0500 station time, which was not a negotiable position. The station AI activated the dormitory lighting at 0450, a gradual increase rather than a sudden illumination, which Kael appreciated in principle and slept through in practice, having been awake since 0330. He had spent the hours between 0330 and 0450 lying in the dark with his eyes open, reviewing everything he had absorbed in the Academy database over the past several weeks and cross-referencing it with what he had observed in his first several hours on the station. None of this was a problem. All of it was data. He was filing it systematically and would continue filing it until it became familiar, at which point it would cease to require active processing and become background. He estimated this would take 4 to 7 days. Doss, across the room, was a dedicated sleeper who appeared to require physical intervention to achieve consciousness. Mira emerged from her alcove with the alert, already composed efficiency of someone whose family had been waking at military hours since before she was born. Sable was simply present. At some point between the AI's light cycle and full station morning he had become vertical and dressed without anyone observing the transition. Doss was still horizontal.
Does he need?
Probably.
Doss surfaced eventually under his own power, with great drama and several comments about the station AI's optimistic definition of morning, and they went to the orientation assembly. The orientation assembly took place in the Academy's main hall, a vast, high-ceilinged space in the central spine of the station, ringed with the Academy's history in the form of names carved into the gray and silver walls, graduates who had gone on to commands, to discoveries, to the kind of service that earned permanent commemoration. 312 Foundation cadets filled the hall in rows, in the gray cadet uniform. Kael had put his on that morning with the same attention he gave to everything and had found that the fabric was a technology he had not encountered before, temperature regulating, impact absorbing to a minor degree, with microcircuitry woven through it that connected to the lens network. He had run his thumb along the collar seam and thought, this is not a uniform. It is equipment. He approved. The instructors entered. Kael, standing in the third row because he had positioned himself for optimal sightliness without making this obvious, assessed them as they walked to the front of the hall. And then Thresh walked in and Kael's assessment recalibrated entirely. He was in his late 50s, perhaps older. His face was deeply scarred on the left side, from temple to jaw, an old injury, long healed, wearing its history without apology. He moved with the particular economy of someone who had never once in their adult life made an unnecessary movement, and whose body had so thoroughly absorbed this principle that efficiency was no longer a discipline but a nature. His eyes were dark, quick, and carried the specific quality of attention that came from decades of assessing threats, not suspicious, not hostile, but permanently, precisely aware. He stood at the front of the 312 cadets and he looked at them. The hall went silent. Not because Thresh had raised his hand or made a signal. Because the quality of his attention landed on the room like a physical thing, and the room responded.
Foundation intake, 2847. My name is Master Instructor Thresh. I run combat and tactical training. You will spend more time with me than with any other instructor. Some of you will find this motivating. Some of you will find it difficult.
He paused.
Good. Both responses are appropriate.
His eyes moved across the rows, methodically, quickly. His eyes reached the third row and they stopped. For approximately 2 seconds, Master Instructor Thresh looked at Kael Raven. Kael looked back. Something happened in that exchange that Kael catalogued carefully and could not immediately classify. It was not hostility. It was not warmth. It was the specific quality of attention from someone who has seen something they were not expecting and have decided, in the time it takes to draw a breath, exactly what they intend to do about it. Then Thresh moved on.
The Academy does not manufacture soldiers. It does not manufacture commanders. What it does, what I do, is find out what each of you already is, and hold that up to the light until you can see it clearly yourself. Some of you will like what you see. Some of you will not. Both outcomes are acceptable.
He let that settle.
You will begin to find out which, tomorrow morning at 0500. Dismissed.
He left the hall. The noise returned, gradually, carefully, like an animal re-entering a clearing after a predator has passed through.
I have decided, Doss said quietly, that I both fear and respect that man, and I am uncertain which feeling is stronger. Is that normal?
Yes.
Good. Glad it's not just me.
Navigation and astrophysics was held in a simulation chamber on the second ring, a large circular room whose walls, floor, and ceiling could become any environment the instructor specified. In its default navigation configuration, the room displayed a real-time three-dimensional star map of the Velhari system and its three adjacent systems, rendered in such precise scale and detail that standing inside it felt like standing in space itself. Instructor Veril was 29 years old, which made her young for an academy instructor and which she handled by being so obviously gifted at her subject that the age difference stopped being relevant within approximately 15 minutes of anyone being in her class. She was slight and quick-moving with sharp dark eyes and the habit, when genuinely interested in something, of going completely still. She found it on the third day, in her second navigation class with the foundation intake. She had set them a standard first-week exercise, a three-body gravitational problem. Most cadets worked through it in 20 to 30 minutes with their lenses providing support calculations. Kael solved it in 4 minutes and 30 seconds without lens support. Then he did something the exercise did not ask for. He ran a second calculation, unprompted, apparently for his own satisfaction, that identified a more elegant approach vector using a gravitational assist from the smaller of the two bodies that the problem had framed as a complicating factor. The second solution required holding the entire problem in 3 dimensions simultaneously and rotating it until an angle appeared that the standard 2-dimensional analysis couldn't find. Veril had been moving through the room, monitoring progress on the lens network. She paused at Kael's position. She looked at his interface panel. Then she looked at him. He was looking at the star map, not at her, running something else now, a voluntary extension of the problem into a fourth variable that she had not introduced. She did not say anything. She made a small notation on her own lens, and moved on. That evening, she quietly filed a request with the Academy's assessment system to adjust Kael Raven's navigation simulation parameters. Not dramatically, just one level up. She would see what happened. What happened was that he solved the next 3 problems with the same speed, found secondary solutions to 2 of them, and on the third day asked her a question after class that she had to think about for 6 minutes before she could answer it, which had not happened to her since her own academy years. She adjusted the parameters again. She would keep adjusting them for the rest of the year. Kael had never been bored before. On Dusk Era there was always work, always something to learn. Boredom was not a condition that had been available to him. At the academy, for the first time in his life, some of his classes did not require his full attention. He sat in these classes and he was present and attentive, and he did not cause any difficulty, because his parents had raised him to be present and attentive and not to cause difficulty. But his mind, when underoccupied, did what minds of his type always did: it found something else to do. In foundational sciences, while the class worked through thermodynamic principles he had understood since age 8, he was simultaneously running, on his lens in a minimized display, a new navigational problem he had set himself, a theoretical fold route through an uncharted region between the Velhari system and the adjacent Dravani system, avoiding 3 known gravity anomalies. His lens, he noticed around the 3rd week, had started doing something he had not instructed it to do. When he was in an underoccupied class, it would proactively present him with extension material, advanced texts, supplementary problems, connections between the current subject and fields he had indicated interest in. He had not set this up. The lens had, apparently, set it up itself, having observed the pattern of what he actually needed versus what the standard curriculum provided. He noted this. He found it efficient. He did not mention it to anyone. The lens pulsed once, softly, when he acknowledged the new behavior. He was fairly certain that was not a standard response in the default programming. He filed this under, things to understand later.
Can I ask you something?
You're going to regardless.
That's fair. Do you ever blink?
What?
Blink. Do you blink at the standard human rate? Because I've been paying attention, not in a concerning way, I want to be clear, in a scientifically curious way, and you blink significantly less than baseline. In the navigation class you went 4 minutes and 11 seconds without blinking once. I timed it.
You timed my blinking during a navigation class.
The exercise wasn't challenging me, so I had time.
I blink. I just don't blink when I'm processing something.
And you're always processing something.
Generally.
Right. He consumed a significant portion of his meal. The eyes are very green, by the way, when you do that. The not blinking thing. Someone mentioned it in the mess last week. Not in a bad way. Just they're very green. Like something's lit up behind them.
Kael was quiet for a moment.
My mother has the same eyes. Slightly darker. She does the same thing.
Yeah? He paused. Sounds like quite a person.
She is. She's the most capable person I've ever been in the same room as.
Doss was quiet for a moment, which for Doss was the equivalent of a moment of formal respect. Then,
The food here is better than I expected, by the way. I thought synthesized would taste like processed protein packs. This actually tastes like food.
It is food. Molecularly identical to real food.
Does it taste like your farm food?
No.
What does your farm food taste like?
Kael thought about Sarah's kitchen at dawn. The smell of the heat unit. Real vegetables from Duskaran soil. The specific quality of cold climate produce, denser, more intensely flavored than anything grown in warmth and convenience.
Like something that costs something to grow.
Doss looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded.
I'm going to remember that.
The first Thresh physical session happened on day 2, before Kael had his bearings in anything else, which he later understood was deliberate. The combat training bay was on the 4th ring, a vast, padded space with adjustable gravity and walls that could be configured as obstacles, barriers, or impact surfaces. It smelled of exertion and the faint ionist tang of training equipment that had absorbed years of energy discharge. Everything in the space was functional. Nothing was decorative. It was, Kael thought, the most honest room he had encountered on the station so far. Thresh ran them through a basic physical assessment first. He observed without expression. He wrote nothing down, which indicated either that he was memorizing everything, which Kael considered likely, or that the assessment was less about the metrics than about watching how people moved when they thought they were just being measured. Kael ran the assessment at full capacity. He had no interest in strategic underperformance. After the assessment, Thresh taught them the Academy's baseline hand-to-hand framework, positioning, weight distribution, how to fall correctly, how to create space, how to read the microsignals of an opponent's intention before the intention became movement. This last component Kael had not been taught. He simply did it. He did not know how he did it, the same below-conscious mechanism that had operated in the jungle, in every small physical moment that had always been faster than his mind. On day 4, Thresh paired Kael with a third-year cadet named Devel who outmassed Kael by 30 kilograms and had 4 years of academy training to Kael's 4 days. The room, subtly, paid attention. Doss, standing off to the side waiting for his own pairing, caught Myra's eye. Myra's expression said, "This is either going to be very bad or very interesting." Doss's expression said, "Probably both." Kael took a hit early, the impact significant, his body already adjusting in response before his mind had fully processed what had happened. Then his instincts found the frequency of Devel's movement and everything clarified. The exchange ended with Devel on the mat, not hurt, looking up at the ceiling with an expression of genuine confusion, not entirely sure how he had arrived there. The room was quiet for a moment.
Right then.
Thresh said nothing. He looked at Kael for 2 seconds. Then he moved on to the next pairing. That evening he made a series of notations in Kael Raven's assessment profile. The notations were extensive. He had not written this much about a Foundation cadet since 2831. The following week, the Foundation cadets began learning the Resonance Blade framework, which was not standard Foundation curriculum until the 3rd month. He introduced it without explanation. Doss caught up with Kael after the session in the corridor.
Your ribs.
I'm fine.
You're breathing at about 80% capacity on the left side.
I'm fine. I'll use a Mediseal tonight.
Right. Also, how did you do that? The thing where you were somehow already in the place he was going to be.
I don't entirely know. I see it before it happens. Not as a prediction, more as a certainty. Something in the way he moved told me where the next movement was going to be.
Is that normal for you?
I don't know what normal is for me yet.
This was the most honest thing he had said since arriving. It arrived in the 5th week, via fold burst transmission from Duskara's orbital relay, the slight delay of cross-system messaging meaning it had been sent 9 days before it arrived, which Kael found himself thinking about. 9 days ago, his father had sat down and written this. Somewhere between Velhari Prime and Duskera, for 9 days, it had been on its way to him. He read it on his lens, standing at the viewport in the dormitory on a quiet afternoon when the others were elsewhere.
Kael, third harvest came in well. Better than expected on the eastern field, the lime treatment is working. Took 3 seasons, but it's working. Vaughn had an unusual eclipse last week. Sarah said you would have wanted to see it. It lasted about 4 hours, and the shadow moved differently than the standard calculations predicted. I wrote down what I observed in case it's useful to you. The fence on the southern boundary needs replacing again. The jungle took another 2 meters in the late season. We've dealt with it. Your mother is well. She asks questions about the academy every evening that I cannot answer. I told her to send you the questions directly. She said she doesn't want to fill your transmission allocation with things you already know. I told her to send them anyway. The farm is the farm. It is here. We are here. Work hard.
He read it 6 times. Not because it was complex. Because each reading found something new in it, not a new word or a new meaning, but a new register of the same meaning, the way a harmonic in music contains its fundamental frequency and also everything that frequency produces in the space around it. He stood at the viewport with Velhari Prime's blue curve filling the lower half of the view and the stars filling the upper half, and he held the compass in his hand without deciding to take it out. The needle did its searching tremble against the station's metallic environment, pointing, trying, adjusting, never quite settling. Always looking for something to orient by. He was aware, in a specific and detailed way, that he missed his father. Not as an abstraction, as a physical presence. The particular quality of standing near Idran, the way that proximity had always felt like standing near something solid and entirely reliable. He had not understood, while it was available to him, quite how much of his orientation had been provided by that proximity. He understood it now. He heard the door of the dormitory open and he turned to find Doss, returning from wherever he had been, carrying 2 containers of something from the cadet mess. Doss looked at him. His expression did a thing it rarely did, it went quiet. He looked at the compass in Kael's hand. He looked at the lens on Kael's wrist, the message interface still open. He did not read the message. He could see, from across the room, what kind of message it had been. He held out one of the containers without speaking. Kael looked at him for a moment. Then he put the compass in his pocket and crossed the room and took the container. They stood at the viewport together in silence for a while, looking at the planet below. Doss did not say anything. This was, of all the things Doss had done in the 5 weeks Kael had known him, the most significant. Because it meant he understood, without being told, without needing it explained, exactly what kind of silence the moment required. He was more than he appeared. Kael had known this from day 2. This confirmed it. Eventually Kael said, looking at the planet.
My father sent a message. The harvest was good.
Yeah.
The eastern field finally came right. He's been working on it for 3 seasons.
Good man.
And he meant it completely. They stood there for a while longer. Outside the viewport, Velhari Prime turned slowly in its generous golden light, and somewhere beyond all of it, 9 full hours away, a cold purple sky hung over a farm at the edge of the universe where 2 people were going about the work of a life they had built with their hands, as they always had, because that was who they were. He held that thought like he held the compass, not tightly, not desperately, but deliberately. Knowing where he stood. He found it on his 3rd night on the station. The top ring. The transparent alloy dome that curved above the outermost level of the academy, uninterrupted by structure or framework for a full 180-degree view of open space. He had read about it in the academy specifications. He had been waiting until he knew the station well enough to move through it at night without his attention being divided between navigation and the sky. On the 3rd night he knew the station well enough. He used the maintenance access route. He had identified it on day 1, an unmonitored corridor connection to the upper ring used primarily by the station's maintenance drones, because the primary access required cadet authorization codes he did not yet have, and because waiting for authorization felt unnecessary when the route existed. He was aware this was technically against regulations. He was also 9 years old and had been navigating by the stars from a rooftop without parental permission since age 6, so the precedent was established. The dome was extraordinary. From Duskera, even from the rooftop with its perfect dark sky, you were looking up through an atmosphere, thin as it was, the cold Duskaran air still filtered and scattered and reduced. From the observation deck, there was nothing between you and space except the alloy panel, which was optically perfect, which meant the stars were the stars as they actually were, absolute, unreduced, in their true quantity and depth and variety. He sat on the curved bench that ran around the dome's interior, leaned back against the transparent wall, and looked up. It was everything the rooftop had been and more. The same ache. The same pull. The same sourceless certainty of something out there calling, except that from here, the distance was not abstract. He was already out there. He was in space. The thing calling was further, and its direction was clearer, and whatever it was not getting quieter. He held the compass. The needle moved in its searching tremble.
Thanks. Make it mean something. Thanks. You always know where you stand.
He sat up there for 2 hours. He would come back every night that the maintenance corridor was accessible, which was most nights. It became his again, a version of the rooftop transported across 9 full hours, his private relationship with the sky continuing in a new location, the same conversation with a different view. He was there, on his 14th visit to the dome, when Mira came through the same maintenance access he used. She stopped when she saw him. He looked at her. She was in off-duty clothes, the formal uniform replaced, which made her look both younger and more herself. She had something in her hand, a small flat device, a holoframe showing a static image. She looked at him for a moment. At the compass in his hands. At the fact that he was there at all, via the same route she had used, which told her everything about how he had found the place. Then she crossed the dome, sat on the bench at a distance that was not close and not far, and looked up at the stars. They sat in silence for a while.
Same route?
Day 4. The maintenance corridor. The authorization codes aren't active until year 2.
Day 3.
Of course.
He glanced at the hollow frame in her hand. She noticed. She turned it slightly so the image faced him. It was a family photograph, formal, military posture on the adults, a younger Mira standing between 2 people who shared her cheekbones and her quality of precise attention. Her parents. In uniform. The kind of uniform that had rank insignia.
They're expecting a great deal from you.
Everyone is always expecting something. What I'm working out is what I expect from myself.
That's the harder question.
Yes, it is.
They did not have a deep conversation. They were not, yet, people who had deep conversations with each other. But something established itself in the silence, a recognition between 2 people who were alike in the ways that mattered, the need for the sky, the weight of expectations, the quality of carrying things that were too large and too real to set down. She came back the following night. And the one after that. They did not always talk. Mostly they just looked at the stars. It was enough. Kael Dorn was 17, broad-shouldered, with the kind of looks that came from good genetics and access to excellent medical care. He was a second-year cadet. His family had been on Velhari Prime for 7 generations. His great-grandfather had a name on the main hall wall. His father sat on the Velhari Compact Security Council. He had been preparing for the academy since he was 4 years old, and had spent his first year establishing himself as the most exceptional cadet in his intake year. He had been the most exceptional person in every room he had been in since age 12. Then Kael Raven arrived, and Kael Dorn had to encounter the experience of walking into the combat bay and understanding, within the first 10 minutes of watching the new Foundation intake run their assessment circuit, that the most exceptional person in the room was 9 years old, from a planet nobody had heard of, and had apparently never been in a combat training facility in his life. The green eyes, catching the training bay's lights as Kael moved, had not helped. Dorn was not a stupid person. He understood that what he felt was something between threat and affront, and that these were not admirable responses, and that a person of genuine quality would examine them honestly and make better choices. He was fully capable of this analysis. He simply chose not to make better choices. Not yet. He began small. The subtleties available to an experienced second-year cadet were extensive. Kael observed this within the first week. He filed it. He said nothing about it. Doss, who had a social intelligence that he wore under his noise-like armor, said plenty about it, quietly, to Kael, in the dormitory.
He's making things difficult. Not loudly. The resource allocation thing, the group assignments, those aren't accidents.
I know.
What are you going to do?
Nothing yet.
Nothing yet is different from nothing.
Yes. It is.
He was not, he discovered, particularly frightened of Kael Dorn. What he found more interesting was trying to understand Dorn. The pattern of the behavior told Kael something about what Dorn actually was under the performance of it. He was afraid. Not of Kael specifically, of what Kael represented, which was evidence that the story Dorn had been telling himself about his own primacy was not as certain as it had seemed. He noted, filing this, people who are afraid make predictable decisions. And predictable is manageable. In the 8th week, Dorn escalated. He had connections in the simulation technical team. The exercise parameters were adjusted, the gravitational scenario that formed the central problem had a variable introduced that made the standard solution set fail without apparent reason. The exercise was assigned to a group that included Kael. Kael walked into the simulation chamber and spent the first 90 seconds simply looking at the scenario. Not solving it. Looking at it. He felt it in 90 seconds. The gravitational variable was wrong. Not wrong as in difficult, wrong as in internally inconsistent. He spent 30 seconds confirming this on his lens. Then he turned to the group.
The parameters are inconsistent. The scenario as set cannot be solved with the information provided because the information is internally contradictory. We have two choices. We can submit a technical fault report, which will void the exercise and require a reset. Or we can solve a different version of the problem, one that makes the internal logic consistent, and submit that solution instead.
The group looked at him. One of them said, a different version.
The parameters as given are wrong in a specific way. If you correct the inconsistency in the way that produces the minimum deviation from the given values, you get a solvable scenario. I can show you.
He showed them. He solved the corrected version in 12 minutes and they submitted the solution with a technical annotation flagging the parameter inconsistency. He did not say it was deliberate. He did not mention Dorn's name. He submitted a factual technical note about the parameter values and left it there. From the back of the observation room, Kael Dorn watched this happen. His expression, for approximately 4 seconds, was completely unguarded. In the mess that evening.
You knew.
Yes.
Before you went in?
I suspected. I confirmed it inside.
And you didn't report it as sabotage?
No.
Why?
Because proving it would require evidence I don't have. And because the Academy's assessment system now has a technical anomaly on record in Dorn's exercise area with my group's name attached to a correct solution. That's enough.
You're going to let the record speak for itself.
Records are patient. So am I.
You know, most 9-year-olds don't think like this.
I know.
And he said it without pride, without discomfort, as simple information, a fact about himself he was still in the process of coming to terms with. Dorn did not accept the outcome of the exercise gracefully. He found Kael in a corridor on the second ring, 3 days after the exercise, with 2 of his cohort with him. Dorn was in his full second-year uniform, the 3 silver pips catching the corridor light. The exercise anomaly report went to the technical review board. I've been told there'll be a process. It'll come to nothing, technical faults happen. Kael waited. I want you to understand something. Whatever you think you saw, or think you know, or think gives you some kind of position here, you're wrong. You arrived from nowhere. A planet nobody has heard of, from a family nobody has heard of. You have no connections, no history in this system, no foundation beyond whatever you were doing in the dirt before Vane found you. The Academy is not the dirt. What works in the dirt does not work here. He was not quite finished when Kael said, quietly.
Are you done?
Dorn blinked. The response was not what the speech had been built to receive.
Because if you are, I'd like to go to the mess. I miss lunch.
What happened next was quick and largely physical. Dorn moved, not thought out, not strategic, the speech having failed and the frustration producing something less considered. He reached for Kael's collar. He did not reach it. What Dorn's 2 companions saw was difficult to process into a coherent sequence afterward. Kael moved, and Dorn's reaching hand was not where it had been, and then Dorn was against the corridor wall with Kael's forearm across his chest and Kael's green eyes approximately 30 centimeters from his face. Nothing had been struck. No blow had landed. Kael's hands were open, his posture not aggressive, it was simply final, in the way that certain physical positions communicate finality without requiring elaboration. Dorn was breathing hard. Kael looked at him, those green eyes, lit from within in the way Dawes had described, absolutely steady, and said,
If you need to keep doing this, I'm here. I will be here tomorrow and the day after and for as long as this takes. But I think we're both wasting time. And I think you know it.
He stepped back. He straightened Dorn's collar, a small, precise gesture, not mocking, simply returning things to order. Then he walked past Dorn and down the corridor toward the mess. Mira, who had been coming from the opposite direction and had arrived at the junction in time to see the last 30 seconds of the exchange, stood very still as Kael passed her. She looked at his face, at those green eyes, calm and steady as deep water, and then she looked at Dorn against the wall, and she made a decision about Kael Raven that she would not revise for the rest of her life. She turned and followed Kael toward the mess. Both Kael and Dorn were called before the disciplinary board the following morning. The charge was physical altercation in a non-training corridor space. Dorn presented his account clearly and with the practiced fluency of someone who had spent the previous evening preparing it. He acknowledged initiating physical contact. He attributed it to a moment of poor judgment under provocation. He expressed appropriate regret. Kael was asked for his account. He gave it. Factually. Without embellishment, without accusation, without the slightest attempt to contextualize or explain himself beyond the physical sequence of events. The board asked if he had anything else to add.
No.
The youngest board member said, "You have no mitigating circumstances to offer. No context you'd like the board to consider."
No. The facts are the facts. I understand the regulation. I accept the consequence.
He received a formal notation on his academy record and a requirement to submit a written reflection on regulation compliance. Dorn received the same, plus an additional notation regarding initiation of physical contact. Thresh was on the board. He said nothing during the proceedings. That evening, Kael's lens pinged with a message from Thresh. 3 words.
Come to bay.
The combat bay was empty at that hour. Thresh was there, standing in the center of the main mat, arms crossed. Kael crossed the bay and stopped in front of him. Thresh looked at him for a moment.
Next time. Shorter.
Kael considered this. Then he understood, not the physical response. The conversation.
Yes, sir.
The physical response was appropriate. I have no objection to it. The conversation before it was unnecessary. Words before action give the other person information. When action is required, it should simply be taken. The speech was a risk you didn't need to accept.
I wanted him to make a different choice. The speech was for that.
Thresh looked at him for a moment. A very brief shift in his expression, something moving behind the controlled neutrality.
That's not tactically wrong. Adjust the delivery. 3 words maximum. Then move, or don't.
3 words.
You used 18. 14 too many. Work on it.
He uncrossed his arms.
The exercise anomaly. The technical board found irregularities.
Yes, sir.
You didn't escalate it.
No, sir.
Why?
Insufficient evidence for the specific accusation. The record is sufficient for now.
You're patient for 9.
I grew up in a place where patience was functional.
Thresh made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood. Then he turned and walked toward the bay exit.
0500 tomorrow. I'm introducing the Advanced Resonance Framework to the Foundation Group. You'll lead the first demonstration pair.
The door closed behind him. Kael stood in the empty bay for a moment. He was 9 years old and the most formidable person he had met since arriving at the academy had just told him, in the specific language of minimum necessary communication, that he had been seen. That he was being taken seriously. That the higher standard was now what he was being held to. He felt the weight of this settle on him the way all the real things settled, not as a burden, but as something that found its place and belonged there. He went back to the dormitory. Dawes looked up when he came in.
Well,
He told me to use fewer words.
that man told you to use fewer words. The person who speaks in telegrams told you to economize on language.
He said I used 18 when 3 would have been sufficient.
And was he right?
Probably.
I find that man deeply alarming and also correct about everything, which is the most uncomfortable combination. How does he do that?
A long time being right.
3 words is a useful principle in most situations.
Everyone looked at his alcove. It was the longest unsolicited statement Sable had made in 8 weeks.
Sable. Was that a general observation or are you telling us something about yourself?
Sable's alcove was quiet.
Right. Filing that.
The maintenance drones that serviced the 4th Ring's combat bay were simple things, 4-limbed, designed for floor cleaning and equipment repositioning, operating on a fixed program with no meaningful decision-making architecture. They responded to the station AI's scheduling instructions, executed their tasks, and returned to their charging stations without variation. On the 43rd day of Kael's academy year, one of them behaved differently. It was during an early morning session, 0400, before the standard day began, when Kael had taken to using the combat bay for private practice. He was 3/4 of the way through a resonance sequence when the drone came out of its corner. Not to clean. Not to reposition equipment. It moved to a point approximately 2 meters from where Kael was working and stopped. Its 4 limbs were in their transport configuration, folded, not extended for task operation. Its sensor array was oriented toward him. Kael stopped the sequence. He looked at the drone. The drone looked at him. Or did whatever the functional equivalent was for a maintenance drone sensor array. Something happened. He did not hear anything. He did not consciously do anything. But the same quality of reaching that had happened in the jungle, the below-conscious, below-intention extension of something toward another living system, happened, except that this was not a living system. This was a machine. And the reaching, finding it, found something that was not alive but was, active, in some way that had no name in his current vocabulary. He looked at his lens. It was pulsing. Not the standard operational pulse, something faster, lower, a frequency he had not seen it use before. It ran for approximately 4 seconds. Then it stopped. The drone returned to its corner. It behaved, from that point, exactly as a maintenance drone was supposed to behave. Kael stood in the middle of the empty bay for a long moment.
What was that?
The lens pulsed once. A single, brief, soft blue. It did not answer. He filed this under the category he had already established, things to understand later. The category was growing. He noted that it was growing and filed that too. He returned to the resonance sequence. Afterward, Doss fell into step beside him in the corridor.
You know, you have this thing where you do something extraordinary and then you look completely normal immediately afterward. It is unsettling. Most people have a moment of visible self-satisfaction. You just move on. Like it's the same as making breakfast.
It is the same as making breakfast.
That is precisely what I find unsettling about it.
The first term assessment period arrived in the 12th week. Kael moved through the assessments with the specific quality of calm that came not from underestimating them but from having spent 12 weeks building a foundation so thorough that the assessments were simply its measurement. Navigation simulation. He completed the standard foundation assessment in the first 40 minutes of the 2-hour window and spent the remaining time extending it into territory Veril had left in the optional extension material, which no foundation cadet in recent memory had reached. Combat assessment. Thresh matched Kael against 3 upper-year cadets in sequence, which was not standard foundation procedure. Kael went 2 for 3. He lost the 3rd bout to a 4th-year cadet who had 3 years of advanced resonance training and the experience to use it with the seamlessness of reflex rather than technique. He lost well, taking the loss completely, learning from it in real time. Thresh, observing, made notations that filled the rest of his assessment pad. Results came out on the last day of the term, distributed via lens to each cadet. Doss, receiving his, made a sound of profound relief and performed a brief celebration that was entirely sincere and slightly undignified, in which Kael watched with something that took him a moment to identify as warm. He was pleased for Doss. Genuinely, simply pleased, the kind of pleasure that belonged entirely to someone else's good news and borrowed nothing from comparison. He opened his own results. He read them. He closed the interface.
Well.
Good.
Define good.
Satisfactory progress.
You got top marks in everything, didn't you?
Most things.
And by most things you mean?
I lost the 3rd combat bout.
Right. Of course you did. How do you feel about that?
I learned more from losing it than I did from winning the other 2. So it was the most useful of the 3.
Doss looked at Mira. Mira looked back. Her expression said, "Yes, this is what we're working with."
Sable. How did you do?
Well enough.
Can you define?
No.
I need friends who give me more information. I'm surrounded by people who have made a philosophical commitment to minimal disclosure.
You provide enough information for all of us.
It was the first time she had made a joke. It was dry and precise and delivered without a change in expression. Kael looked at her. She was looking at the wall.
She made a joke. Did everyone hear that? This is a significant development.
I have always made jokes. You have been too loud to hear them.
The room was, briefly, genuinely happy. Kael sat in the middle of it and felt the happiness land on him and did something he rarely did in the presence of other people. He let it show. A small thing, a fraction of the control released, something quiet and warm crossing his face for a moment. Doss caught it. He said nothing about it. He just noted it, the way he noted everything important, and filed it. On the last night before the term break, Kael went to the observation deck alone. It was late, past midnight station time, the amber night cycled deep in its run, the corridors empty. The dome was extraordinary tonight. A debris trail from a recent meteor event in the outer system had seeded the immediate vicinity with particles that produced, in the dome's field of view, something between a fog and a prism. The stars beyond were slightly diffused. The effect was less sharp than the clear sky view but more alive, the light moving, shifting, the sky itself in gentle motion. He sat. He looked up. He had been at the academy for 12 weeks. He took an honest inventory. He had 3 people who might, in time, become the kind of thing that mattered: Doss, who had decided this unilaterally and had turned out to be correct; Mira, who had found her way to the same sky and the same silence; Sable, who was a door without a handle that he was not going to force. He had Thresh, who held him to a standard above the standard. He had Veril, who saw him as a person rather than a result. He had Kael Dorn, unresolved. He had a lens that was doing things he had not programmed it to do. He had a compass in his pocket that did not orient on this station. He took it out. He held it in his palm and let the needle move. He thought about Duskera. The farm. Idrin at the boundary line, standing straight. Sarah's hands on his face. He was not homesick in the way he had feared he would be, the paralyzing, undermining homesickness of someone unmoored. He was homesick in a different way, the functional kind, the kind that told you where your foundation was, that reminded you what you were building on and therefore what you were building for. It was not weakness. It was navigation. He looked up through the moving, prismatic debris light at the stars beyond, and he felt the pull, the same ache, the same sourceless certainty of something out there waiting, and it was not hollow anymore. It had direction. It had been given direction by 12 weeks of this place and these people and the specific, grinding, extraordinary work of becoming. Then he put the compass in his pocket, and he got up, and he went back to the dormitory. First year is where the academy finds out who you are. Not in the assessments, though those matter. Not in the combat sessions, though those matter too. In the smaller things, the way you behave when nobody is watching, the way you treat the people who can give you nothing, the quality of attention you bring to things that are not directly useful to you. In these things, Kael Raven had a first term that the Academy's assessment system did not have adequate categories for. Not because he was beyond the system's ability to measure. Because he was something the system's categories had not anticipated measuring. Thresh, writing his private notes at the end of term, used a word he had used twice in 20 years of Academy instruction. He crossed it out. He wrote it again. He left it. The word was, exceptional. Veril sent a formal request to the Academy's academic board to have Kael's navigation program reclassified from Foundation to Advanced without the standard 2-year wait. The board discussed it for 3 hours. They approved it. His lens filed a self-modification report with the Academy's AI oversight system, a routine requirement for any AI system that had altered its own architecture. The oversight system received the report, logged it, and sent it to a sub-queue for later review. The sub-queue was long. It would not reach the report for 11 months. Kael Dorn requested a transfer to the Academy's secondary campus, on the other side of Velhari Prime's orbit. The request was pending. And in room 42, third ring, Section 7. A 9-year-old boy with black hair and green eyes lay in his alcove and looked at the ceiling and thought about a farm. Thought about a compass that trembled and searched. Thought about the direction that the star pole was pointing, which was clearer now than it had been, which was forward. Always forward. Into whatever was coming. He could not yet see what was coming. He was beginning to understand that this was fine. You did not need to see the destination. You needed to know your heading. He knew his heading. Next, Story 3, Second Year. The Space Adventures of Kael Raven.